welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and I am here with the author of This Ravishing World, which is a very timely collection of interconnected short stories that will definitely make you think about the world and the planet and humanity and everything surrounding that. Please introduce yourself and tell us about where this ravishing world came from.
Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me on your program. I'm just thrilled to talk to you and readers. I'm Nina Schuyler, and I wrote In This Ravishing World and sent it out. When you write a collection, the best way to get it published is try to win a contest or two. So I sent it out to contests and actually won 2 contests. So that led to publication. It won the Prism Prize for Climate Literature and the W.S. Porter Prize for a short story collection. And so what it is about is I have all these characters kind of revolving around the theme of climate change. So I'd initially started out writing from one point of view, and it just felt wrong that the story had to be told by a lot of points of views because we are all affected and going to be affected by climate change. And I thought this had to be a collective book because it's a collective problem. So that's what happened. I started with an environmental economist. Her name's Eleanor, and she's 70, and she's full of despair because her whole life work has resulted in today, which is not where she hoped it would end up. And she's gone around trying to convince companies to essentially stop polluting or internalize what is called in economics externalized costs. And here we are, and she's just full of despair. And then that wasn't enough. I stopped writing from her point of view and needed to invite other voices into the collection.
So I have a lot of thoughts about it. The first question I have is, so why did you decide then short stories interconnected and not a novel specifically?
Yeah, well, in some ways I feel like it is a novel because Eleanor weaves throughout, almost like if anyone is a fan of Olive Kittredge, which it was called a novel, Olive is wandering around, even if she's not the main character in one of the stories, she's there. And the same thing, Eleanor kind of floats and suddenly appears in someone else's story. It's like, here she is again. But I just wanted to truly inhabit other characters. And, I guess I could have called it a novel, but I also had never written a short story collection. And I'm someone with a restless mind and needs to try something that they haven't done before. It's like, how can I make some of these stories really feel like the shape of a short story, and some of them don't in my mind. They're very open-ended at the end of them, and there's a forward motion to keep reading because there isn't that closure or a little bit of closure that you usually find in a short story. So the image I really like is like a carrier bag. Like it's a bag of people, trying to navigate in the modern world, in today's world, with this huge thing happening. And what are they going to do? And how are they handling it?
I definitely agree. And I think like that was the reason I'd asked that, because I noticed, you've done novels before. So it is a collection of short stories and interconnected short stories. And I thought that as soon as you said it was written originally from one person's point of view, I'm like, well, obviously it's definitely Eleanor. She was a really sympathetic character, and I thought that 70 was a really interesting age to kind of set her at. Mostly from, just kind of like looking at me and, just in general, my parents were 70 around 70 when they passed. But they, they would always talk about movements that they grew up during and, feeling like they were really at the forefront of it. And I knew as they were aging, their minds certainly didn't feel 70, but they looked at everything that was going on around them. And, I think they were at points really hopeful that some of the change was actually effective. And then, just like for an example, the week that my mom passed was the week that Roe was struck down. And, it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
how do you reconcile that? But, for Eleanor specifically, like this was her life's work. This is
That's
what,
it.
this is what she was passionate about. And then kind of looking just at the world and at climate change, which is still very much an issue, whether or not people want to admit it or not. It was really heartbreaking to see somebody at 70 who, is kind of on that brink of, I'm heading towards what one would call old age. I don't necessarily know that I want to commit to that.
Yeah.
But this is where we're at. And oh, the earth that I really wanted to save is sick. And
Yeah.
it feels very urgent.
Good. So, at least 50 years of her life were devoted to that work. So, in a way, she was in one movement to try to address climate change and the negative effects that human activity are having on the planet. And I think in the West, the Western mythology is progress. We are seeped in it. Other countries don't have it, but we are definitely we think that everything is moving to a better state. And yet, if you hit 70 and your life's work has not progressed to a better state, you just start to wonder, what did you do with your life and where did you go wrong and how could you have done things differently? So she is in that state. And it is novelesque because there is a character arc for her. And by the end, she does get out of this grief. I think at this point, the environmental activists that are out there, the climate change activists, we don't have time for grief. They keep saying it's like we just have to act. So fortunately, Eleanor, I don't want to give away, but she makes it out and gets acting again. So there is kind of a novelesque character arc and a nod to the Western desire for progress.
And I think you do address like the difference between activists now and how it's almost like they're targeted for their really for saying this and for being just really urgent about it and being like we've got to do it. And I thought that was man, that was felt very relevant. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, and also just a little bit about the other stories and how you decided when Eleanor was going to appear in them, and whether you had her arc mapped out throughout it, or whether it just kind of worked naturally as she interacted with the other characters in their stories.
Yeah. Her arc really was a art of discovery. I didn't know really who she was going to encounter and how the interactions would change her. And that was exciting to write that way. Just unlike a novel, I felt like this one I let it just unfold. Well, she has two children who make it into the book. Ava, who is a scientist who's busy trying to speed up a bacteria that eats plastic. And this is actually going on in the world, that we've found bacteria that eat plastic, but they just have to eat it faster because there's so much plastic. And she's grappling with whether to have a child. The thing is, she's so well informed about the collapse of the ecosystems. It's like, how do you grapple with that? It's a dilemma. Like, do you bring a child into the world when when you're in the front row seat of everything that's happening, it factually, what do you do? So she is grappling with that. And then her son comes in, Ed, who's a ballet dancer, and he's involved in more and more art organizations are getting involved in promoting or addressing climate change. And he's in a performance, and part of it, the performance requires him to inhabit the consciousness of a rat. So that became really interesting to think about other non-human ways of being and how human exceptionalism has made us not even consider that till recently, really. I just was rereading Descartes and how, the 17th century and way up to the 20th, we thought of, animals, and some people still do, are soulless. They're instinct driven only. They have no feelings. They have no thoughts. They're just impulse, instinct. So we've been under that kind of thinking for a long time. And so in that section, he's trying to really think, how does a rat think? To try to bring more awareness of there's other ways of being in the world and other kinds of intelligence other than the human intelligence.
Yeah, and as we know, rats are actually fairly smart.
They are. They're really smart.
Really, really smart. And I mean, Ava's story, just about the whole idea is like whether or not to have kids. As a mom myself, I love my kids and I want them to have the best possible world, but it is really felt very, very relevant, because that is kind of like the great great, I think, like thinking person's question in a way. A lot of people are having that question. First of all, there's the whether or not, like, like, are you having kids because society says you should have them, or do you really want them? And then there are the people who are like, I would love to have kids, but is this, like, what am I giving them? Like, what if you feel like, you're looking at what's going on and what's unfolding? And for somebody like Ava, it just felt very, very real and very raw, and just kind of beautifully written, being that she is the daughter of the for lack of a better phrase, side protagonist, who is sort of watching everything unfold herself.
Yeah. Well, we haven't talked about the voice that I grappled with and struggled with the most, which is I invite nature into the collection.
So I have that in my notes,
Okay.
and I was going to ask you about it, and I am extremely glad that you brought that up, because I wanted to know where nature's narrative came in, and was that really hard for you to find that voice? Because it's very different than giving voice to these human characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after one of California's many wildfires, and I can't remember which one because we've had so many, Governor Gavin Newsom said, he was either on the radio or I probably was listening to the radio, nature is talking to us. And I felt a chill just run through me, and then my imagination took over, and it's like, well, what is it saying? What would nature like to tell us? And what does nature's voice sound like? And nature's been around for billions of years. What's nature's view of things? In the beginning, so nature also, like Eleanor, weaves in and out of the collection, and really invited humans into the discussion, into the collection, because it's trying to get humans to listen to its voice, to nature's voice. And when I first started writing nature, it was just roaring, unbridled blast of rage. It's like, no one's going to listen to this angry, tortured voice of, look what's happened to me. So I just tried and tried. And I knew then, after writing pages and pages of that rage, that it had to be far more nuanced and many different notes of sound: joy, sorrow, desperation, playfulness, even nature, how does it carry on? So, but a lot of pages were tossed in the garbage to figure out that voice and appeal to the human ear.
So what was that the most challenging part of writing the book, would you say?
Yeah. Just getting that voice, because when I first told someone, oh, I'm writing nature's voice, they asked me, it was a children's book? Because the last time most people have read any anthropomorphized, entity, a rabbit, dogs, when they're talking, as a children's book. And then at some point, you're told to graduate and read only about humans and human relations. And those belong back to your childhood. But I'm coming to believe that it's a mistake, because the more we can empathize with the non-human world, the more we are going to be willing to help it and take care of it and save it. And so that was another reason I wanted nature in here. Like, can I make it a voice that people will want to care for and think about and listen to, and be more aware that there's other, like I said, intelligence out there. So I remember growing up, my parents had the record Song of the Humpback Whale. I don't know if that ghostly sound floated in your house, but I did some research on that. And after that record came out, there was a public, demand to stop killing whales. So it ended up turning into laws and regulations of, when could whales be killed and for what? And that continues to today. This huge mammal, there's such support for it, but it actually can be traced back to the 1970 record that this scientific couple put together and said, because they'd been listening to the whales for so long, it's like other people have to hear it. So that also was kind of inspiring to me to go ahead and put nature's voice in this work. Now there's other people, right? There's Lincoln, who lives in an urban blight, and there's in the setting is Bay Area, San Francisco, and there's definitely places in San Francisco there's no nature, there's none, and it seems to be correlated. The less wealthy you are, the less nature. That's just an interesting phenomena, and he's set out to change that. He doesn't think that's fair. That's not justice. So he's there, and he kind of wanders and bumps into Eleanor. She's out looking at the moon one night. And then there's another character, Hugh, who's a techie guy. We have a lot of tech people in the Bay Area, San Francisco, and he's trying to escape it. And people still, I meet people like, what can you buy? Where can you go that you won't be affected by climate change? So that kind of zeitgeist is out there as well. So I have that in the book. And then I know techie friends who code and all day long, and they never are out in nature. They're just completely in the digital world. So I've got that kind of character as well.
So how did you decide how many stories were going to be in the book?
That's a great question. I just kind of, as people kind of entered the collection, again, I didn't sit down and map it out. I sat back at some point. It's like, do I have enough diverse perspectives to give kind of a bigger picture of climate change and climate change awareness and escapism and activism, to at least have some character that someone might relate to and identify with and care about. And at some point, if I kept going, the book would be huge, right? It's like, so in terms of constraint, like page constraint, it's like, okay, I think I have 9-10 characters, to roam around with and think about this and experience life with, and that's enough. That's kind of not a well-planned thing, but more of a intuitive, okay, I think there's a completion here.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it really was a pretty big and well thought out cross section of San Francisco. My best friend lives in San Francisco, so I've been there several times. And a lot of people associate it with different things, considering, I guess, when you encountered it. But that is a very, it was a very nuanced look just at the area as a whole. And the book was beautiful. My last question is basically, where did the title come from?
Well, I've always loved the word ravish. And ravish, I've learned, is a contronym, which means a word that has two meanings that are opposite or nearly opposite. So ravish means to seize and carry off by force, and it also means to fill with intense delight. And that seemed to capture in a wonderful, amazing way how Earth and nature can seize and carry things off by force through hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, tsunamis, and yet shower us with immense beauty and awe. So it was a word that was, constantly spinning for me, and what nature's able to do and the earth is able to do, and our relationship with the earth.
Thank you so much. I am very happy to have been able to interview you and to be able to chat with you about this book. And thanks so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Great questions. Really great.
I'm very happy to hear that. So we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.